Let's take a little drive to the hills of Ojai. Set that city life aside.
I'm a third-generation Ojai resident. My grandfather was a rancher. He owned a lot of properties here, and my father became kind of a gentleman farmer, and then we grew up in the Ojai Valley with such an idyllic upbringing. You know, running through the fields with my brothers and the dogs. I remember they started spraying, and some of the high school older boys would get hired to go work. They would be out spraying the different chemicals that were being prescribed to spray. Fast forward, all 5 of those boys are dead.
Ojai is a small Southern California town with a big secret. The houses and schools of Ojai sit amongst large orange groves. To kill insects and weeds in the orchards, over 50,000 pounds of toxic chemicals are sprayed in Ojai annually. That's more than 5 pounds per person per year.
In Ventura County, we have the highest use of some of the most toxic pesticides applied per square mile, and this is the highest levels in the state.
The citrus industry is challenged with the disease citrus greening. And so a lot of the spraying of the citrus that we're concerned about now is to control the vector for that disease, the Asian citrus psyllid, and people call that ACP.
It's a bug that strikes fear in the hearts of citrus farmers, the Asian citrus psyllid.
Can infect orange trees with an incurable disease that causes bitter, misshapen fruit and eventually the death of the tree.
Growers gear up to spray their crops with pesticides.
Throughout the orange groves, antiquated fan sprayers spread plumes of poisonous aerosol. The warning labels on these toxic sprays state that nobody should enter an orchard for 12 hours after spraying. But these chemicals don't stay in one place. They volatilize in the sunlight and drift in the air. It's called vapor drift, and it can stretch for miles.
In the Ojai Valley, we've got the Los Padres Forest on one side of us and Sulphur and Black Mountain on the other side. It's a very narrowly circumscribed valley. Any of the emissions that occur within the valley tend to stay in the valley, and it's one of the reasons why we historically have had one of the worst air pollution levels in Ventura County.
I woke up to helicopters one morning. It went on for about 40 minutes, and finally I came outside and I saw 2 helicopters on the farm next door to us, aerial spraying. And I ran back inside and I stayed in there for hours because I didn't want to be exposed to them.
Depending on the physical characteristics of the pesticide, it could travel over the entire valley.
The most commonly sprayed chemicals in the Ojai Valley include abamectin, thiamethoxam, and glyphosate. Abamectin is a neurotoxin. It attacks the central nervous system.
So on October 19th and 20th, Ironically, on Ojai Day, pesticides were sprayed, specifically abamectin.
Exposure to abamectin can cause red, itchy skin, irritated eyes, tremors, vomiting, and problems breathing.
Here in the U.S., it's used on more than 50 crops, everything from Brussels sprouts to almonds, and oranges like these.
So I came around the corner, and here's this truck. It was spraying so high, I want to say as high as maybe 1.5 stories. And so I had to slow down to go past him. I tried to roll everything up as quickly as possible. And I noticed when I was coming back, I had a headache on my right side here. And this whole side of my face, which was the side I drove past, it felt tingly and sort of numb, and I felt it on this entire side for a good 15 minutes.
Because as she was driving by and they were spraying, she felt tingling, my first hypothesis would be that the spinatorum was causing disruption of the neural activity in the musculature of her face. That's the mechanism of action that's killing the insect. It's certainly going to affect all living systems.
Like, why is this guy covered in this mask and this suit, and why am I out there at the same time that he is? Like, it just doesn't seem right.
I start feeling my neck like a sword inside.
And I started investigating, and I see they're spraying all around me.
And then I have a problem with my ears, and I have to go to emergency.
Abamectin has also been linked to seizures and death in dogs.
My little dog went out one night and came in with substance on his paws.
All of his fur was covered with some sort of white stuff.
And he went crazy until finally he turned over and had a horrible seizure.
He was just red and raw. His whole body was hot and on fire. He had a really serious upper respiratory infection. He had toxins in his body.
The pesticides were sprayed on Saturday and Sunday. She started having seizures on Sunday.
He eventually got very, very sick and suddenly died.
And she passed away on Thursday.
That I've since found out that they were spraying this chemical, this Reaper, right on the label. It says symptoms in dogs from confusion, seizures, and death. And that is ultimately what happened to Sam.
Thiamethoxam is a neonicotinoid, which kills bees.
In recent years, the world's population of bees has been decimated. A new study finds that the most widely used kinds of pesticides could be part of the problem.
Bees are critical to the production of 71% of the fruits and vegetables we eat.
The pesticides that are being used are neonicotinoid pesticides, which have been banned in a lot of places, actually, because of their negative impact on pollinator species.
They're the most toxic thing for bees. So if you're using an insecticide that kills insects, it's going to kill your pollinators too.
It is no surprise that the use of thiamethoxam is outlawed in Europe. A popular weed killer used in Ojai is a carcinogen called glyphosate, aka Roundup.
Glyphosate, which is Roundup, we now know that that's a carcinogen, and many plaintiffs are suing.
A federal court unsealed documents in a mass litigation lawsuit Tuesday.
They continue to downplay the risk in order to sell their product by the barrel to farmers all over the world.
By adding a water-soluble toxin like Roundup or glyphosate, we find that we not just affected the microbiome of the soil, but water systems, rivers, and the air that we breathe. In agricultural environments like Ojai, 75% of your air and 75% of your rain is actually contaminated and detectable for Roundup. And so it's in all of your life cycles, which means when you breathe, your sinuses are heavily affected.
Glyphosate is sprayed near schools, on playgrounds, and right next to children. Children who are in daycare and homeschool programs.
And one day, right near the school and near my house, was a Skull and Bones sign. And they were spraying, and the winds were blowing, and the spray was humongously drifting, and it was blowing right toward the kids who were playing in the yard.
I have my daughter in the car. Her school is not a mile away from this, and she called me complaining of stomachache, headache, and her heart is hurting.
I'm an educator in Ojai, California for children ages 3 to 5. And one day the children and I met at Camp Comfort and we noticed that they were spraying right next to the playground.
What is the concentration level of the glyphosate in the solution they're using?
I believe about 5% with an ammonium sulfate additive, which is just a treatment with the water conditioner.
Okay. And this doesn't contaminate the water table?
They are not, no, because they are not in the water.
They're in the stream.
Well, they're in the stream. They were spraying literally 2 feet from the water.
Just for the record, they're now going back out there to spray, even though I've officially requested that you guys stop spraying until we get this resolved.
We will keep you all safe. I promise that. But I also have to carry on.
You're saying it's okay for my daughter to play in the dirt?
It is not going to do anything to you.
And they said that they're going to be over at right across the street from Monica Ross Elementary School tomorrow spraying.
Recent studies link exposure in the cocktail of toxic chemicals sprayed in Ojai to a plethora of childhood disorders.
And what we keep seeing in the laboratory is there is no safe level of these chemicals, either in our food or our water systems. And even to tiny parts per billion, that which you'd see in water or that root vegetable, even at these tiny concentrations, you destroy human biology.
It's absolutely outrageous. EPA has made findings for 2.5 years now that this pesticide is particularly unsafe for children.
A recent study in April did find that even small doses can harm children's brains both before and after birth.
MRIs of the brains of exposed subjects reveal abnormally thin cortices, the outermost layer of nerve cells in the brain, crucial for cognitive functions such as perception, language, memory, and consciousness.
So we're talking about reduced IQ, autism, attention deficit disorder, and it causes that harm at extremely low doses.
We have to come to terms quickly that if we want to see our children survive, which currently they're not doing well, 52% of American children have a chronic disorder or disease by the time they're 17. Children are definitely getting hit the hardest.
There's no other state that has as many people living in such close proximity to the use of so many different pesticides at such high levels. And the other thing that's distinctive about California is we require farmers to keep detailed records of every time they spray a pesticide. What we wanted to do was map pesticide usage, which we did over a 6-year period from 2015 to 2020, where we were able to demonstrate that of the 5 million pounds or so of pesticides applied every year just in Ventura County, a lot of it is applied in fields that are right up next to residences and schools and other sensitive areas. And so our toxicologists worked with our mapping experts and we built this unique system. You can type in your street address and see just how close you are to various levels of pesticides that are being sprayed.
I should start by saying that all pesticides are toxic by design. So red indicates that intensity of exposure. Yellow here does not mean safe, it means that exposures have taken place. So while our map is historic, what we are using it is to advocate to the state officials that there should be an active notification system that should go to the cell phones.
I moved to the east end of Ojai in 2012, and I've been here 10 years. I moved to a place surrounded by orange orchards and just exquisite beauty. On occasion, people spraying, and they're usually not just walking in their shorts and a t-shirt. They're in full gear with shields over their head and, equipment strapped to them and big spray guns. About 2.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was scheduled to have a mastectomy and chemo, and then COVID hits. Never had anything beyond a wisdom tooth pulled. I know a lot of people on the East End. Several personal friends are going through the same thing, and I think the spraying has something to do with this. How could it not? We We breathe it in our daily breath. We eat our food that's getting the spray. It's on everything. It's in the water, it's in the soil. I don't see how you cannot put those two and two together. I want notification, for sure, because then I can take action, and I have a choice with where I want to be at that particular time.
I've heard from my doctor that Ventura County has the highest rate of breast cancer in all of California. I currently have breast cancer, and my father passed away when he was 63, and he lived right in this neighborhood.
What our research found, as tragically has been well known to people living in Ventura, is that communities of color are the ones who are most exposed.
So I'm Barbarino Venturino Shumash. So I originate from the island of Limut, the village of Suajos, which is now Scorpion Anchorage on Santa Cruz Island. My people really took a mind into what they took from the earth, whether it be the animals or plants, herbs, fruits, nuts, anything. We never signed a treaty for the rights of this land. We were removed off this land. A lot of Ventura, California, the city itself, has a lot of my ancestors underneath the pavement. The foundation of agriculture that we see now, it was built on the backs of my people. We were worked into near extinction as a people. When you spray pesticides on the food, you not only ensure that you cause dangers for the food itself, but for the people who work the land. The first thing that comes to mind when I see pesticides, I think of the field workers and working the crops. Sometimes they're out there when they're being sprayed, and I've seen it.
So many people just drive past the fields, not taking a second guess of, who's behind the bandana, the hat, and the hoodie. The fact of the matter is that's someone's mom, that's someone's brother, that's someone's sister. A large portion of those migrants are actually indigenous people from Mexico. The ones that are in the fields, working the land, hands in the dirt, bringing our food to harvest. Many of these people, they're being exploited. Many of the conventional farms are actually using toxic pesticides like glyphosate, paraquat. Folks are being exposed to these chemicals while they're working. Cesar Chavez made a documentary called The Wrath of Grapes, a play on word from the grapes of wrath, right?
Without contracts, farm workers earn low wages under miserable working conditions. They have no protection from deadly pesticides.
And in this film, it talks about many incidences where farm workers were exposed to pesticides and dropped dead right there in the fields. Some started seizing up, drifting in and out of consciousness, only to die a slow and painful death at home. And while we don't hear much about that anymore, it still happens. It's this long-term exposure. Months and years of being in this environment, it bioaccumulates in one's body.
Eran como las 10:35 de la mañana cuando yo empecé a sentir un aroma. Ya fue cuando yo me levanté mi vista y ya vi que venía saliendo una máquina esprayadora a mitad del bloque de enfrente de donde yo andaba. Por 2 minutos yo me empecé a sentir mal, me empecé a sentir débil, empecé a sentir mareado, mis ojos empezaron a llorar. Hace 2 años yo sufrí exposición de pesticidas. 2 años que han pasado, mi vista se ha estado deteriorando. Yo siento que cada vez yo veo menos. Mi visión se está deteriorando, sí.
We're starting to see some of the highest amounts of breast cancer, thyroid cancer, asthma.
Our families are very impacted by working in the fields because they are exposed to pesticides. We have 3 families right now. The young man was 38 when he died of a very rare cancer. The young woman was 34 when she died. A child had leukemia when he was 18 months old. How often would an 18-month-old get leukemia? Unless they're exposed to something. Several of our children who have developmental delays or birth defects, and we have quite a few premature births, and their parents work in the fields.
When I hear farming has always been done this way and it can't change, I think that's a lie. I think it can change.
And there is we want to have say in what growers are doing in our community.
That's not activism.
Fear-mongering.
Public hysteria.
Disinformation. Hearsay to incite hysteria.
But what does it mean? Are indeed poisoning the Ojai community.
Disheartening pariahs.
It's not activism, it's terrorism.
In spite of thousands of citizens who have signed a petition demanding action, growers in the Ojai Valley spray danger and warning label chemicals an average of 78 times per month. That's more than 2 times each day.
No one consents to being poisoned. Oftentimes, pesticide exposure happens without one's consent or knowledge.
My father had cancer, my stepmom had a brain tumor, the gal next to him had cancer, the man right next to the end grove had cancer. Now, I don't know that they are tied to pesticides. I don't know this, but it seems like we should try and find out.
The science of the dangers is clear, but so is the solution.
The problem with agriculture in our community is that it's intermeshed with residential communities. We have orchards and houses and orchards and houses and public schools and orchards, and it's all meshed. Spraying glyphosate creates a public health risk. It kills the soil life, and it's an unnecessary expense that the farmer takes.
In Ventura, if you live in any of the areas that are close to farm fields, it's very likely that you're being exposed to 2, 3, 5, maybe 10 pesticides and all of the chemicals that carry them. So the science takes us in the direction of a simple proposition. Let's reduce exposure. We don't expect people to move. We should, however, expect for farmers to be much more careful than they've been about when they spray, how much they spray, and how they spray. Ultimately, we want to move in the direction increasingly for organic growing methods.
That's why some farmers are breaking the mold and turning to organic orchards that don't require toxic pesticides.
Well, the definition of organic, it's essentially farming in the absence of synthetics. For 21 years, we've had an all-organic restaurant. We have a grocery store and a produce section, and we essentially grow the produce section during the seasons. The value of the organic orange is 2 to 3 times what the value of the conventional orange is. We've had outreach to farmers, we've talked to farmers. You would have thought, for example, that some of the younger farmers would have been a little bit curious, especially about the money. After a 3-year transition, those farms could be selling their produce. There'd be demand for it. They wouldn't have to suffer the vagaries of the marketplace.
The way that we could retrofit the existing agricultural system in this community is by diversifying the crops, growing tree crops, but also keeping livestock underneath them as the weed management, the fertilization, the insect repellent. That's regenerative, and that's something that can last, and that's something that creates community resiliency.
We have to be a part of creating fire-resilient communities. So what tools are out there? There's herbicide. Herbicide will kill the vegetation, will essentially destroy root systems that are holding our soils together. We can graze a number of acres that would take a dozen people to treat. We can treat twice or 3 times or 4 times as fast as people with fossil fuel dependent machines. Most of our goals are to reduce fire hazard and vegetation that grows wildly in the spring and begins to dry. What the sheep and goats love to eat are those flashy fuels. We also graze to achieve ecological goals. Through their rumination in their bodies, they are then producing from the backside dung and urine that is actually bringing nutrients back into the soil. We're mimicking how these native herds moved. If we help to support and regenerate the systems that these ecologies already know how to handle, we wouldn't have these mega fires and these destructive floods and mudslides. It's not rocket science.
We've taken an old farm that was conventionally run, and we're regenerating it with the newest technology available to us to combat some of the ancient problems. What do we use to make that happen? Cover crops. They provide nitrogen for our soil, they provide resilience for the water, they provide food for our pigs that then provide fertility for our oranges. They create flowers for the pollinators that bring the bacteria and the fungi from all the other plants. We are creating a grid that supports the life in this valley like a safety net for a more equitable and sustainable presence on this earth.
It turns out the key to managing pests is actually in the soil.
So this soil is covered with organic matter. There's wood chips, there's been some compost added to this. So we're having this open and receptive exchange between the soil and the atmosphere, and that's what we want to create.
A farm is to a country what a cell is to a body. It's a part of a whole. The more resilience in that structure, the more it will support the larger organism, which is our nation's wealth. I'm gonna be a father soon. I'm now responsible for more than just myself, and so it's become a duty to resist the pressures that say, it's time to spray.
By working with our growers and farmers, we can build a resilient food system to feed our community.
When the schools buy directly from the people that live in that community, I call it school-supported agriculture. We have to identify the farmers that are growing food regeneratively and organically. When you pay the farmers directly, you're going to give them the real price that they need for growing the food. I think this could happen in the public schools. It would be a huge economic stimulus. We all eat something at school. We need to make that school lunch the most healthy, the most delicious, the most diverse, and we can do this.
With your participation, Ojai can become a model for profitable, safe agriculture and a healthy place for generations to come. Let's do it throughout California.